Peters. I'm an ARS scientist with the Jornada. I'm also the lead scientist on the Jornada Basin LTER project. So if you have your paper, we're going to talk about what we've historically called the scrape site, and we're now calling the grow site because we have a lot of perennial grasses on it. So this, if you look at your paper, this area here is a 100-meter diameter. Originally it was scraped of all vegetation. The vegetation was moved off as well as the top surface soil to the side, and then the soil was placed back onto the area, and the plants were removed. Okay, that was in 1996. The top area here. What you can see is that it was actually a grassland around it. Okay, so this was a grassland in 1996, and there were scattered shrubs. All right, so that was 1996. So this was created by wind erosion experts. So we can see like buckets and that kind of thing that were put out there in 1996. It was not done by ecologists. So they were interested in how much movement of sediment you would have if you scraped a large area. That was their goal. So the ARS actually came out and kept it scraped of vegetation up till about 2003. Okay, and we actually have more imagery through time. But I just gave a snapshot of a few. Okay. So we were out here in 2003. I came in 1998, and I saw it at times too. We had a group out here in 2003, and I have photos of Steve Archer at that time, walking out here, and it was like pavement. It was a parking lot, and no clue. It was a parking lot, and all you could see were like shrubs that were about this tall. They were the remnants of dead shrubs. Okay, no grasses, nothing else out here. We had those photos. Okay, it's 2003. Remember what Brandon said? It rained a lot in 2004, 2006. Hurricane Dolly came through in 2008. We had half of our rainfall in 10 days in July. Every single day it rained, okay? 3 different years in a row, basically. It rained a lot, okay? So this totally transformed this area. So then you can actually see what happens in 2005 when you actually scrape an area this size. You can see in 2005 what happened. Now we have a shrub-dominated area around here. This was transforming already around here for other reasons than the landscape. And you can see what happened when they scrubbed this. When they scraped this, the sand started to move, right? So the winds are moving in this direction. So this topsoil is now over here, and it did it every single year. So you can see the data. Here's the sediment flux is in red. So it's really, really high from 1998. Until about 2003. So every single year we came out here and collected how much soil was moving off of this. And it moved over here, okay? And it created this duneland. And that's what happens if you park off the road. You never want to do that because it actually started to blow, okay? So then what happened in 2004, it starts to rain. And we started to get annual plants on here. Very traditional successional series in any sort of desert grassland. Go into tall grass prairie, anything happens. You get annual grasses, annual forbs, and then through time you start to get sort of mid-successional series of grasses, right? Perennial grasses. Very surprising to us at this large of an area. This is a mid-successional grass series, right? You look in the literature. It's Aristida, it's Spirobolus. So Aristida are the 3-on, Spirobolus is the drop seed. It's fantastic. This looks sort of like western Kansas, right? This is amazing. We've never seen this ever before, and we don't even know where these grasses came from. They're probably in the soil. We actually need to figure this out because you walk around here, you see very few of these grasses. They're native grasses. This is not exotic grassland. This is a native grassland. This is amazing. We don't see our black grama yet, our favorite grass. Right, that's our historic grassland. We haven't seen a black grama yet, but we hope it's there. So we also see, look at the mesquite. These are from seedlings, right? So mesquite has come in, right? So now we have this sort of fantastic grassland. So now what we're going to do is we need to figure out sort of what's all in here. This is a fantastic opportunity for us. We've got this successional series going on towards the grassland. We hope we're going to get to black grama. We hope. But now we have to sort of monitor this through time. So this is an amazing grass restoration study that we sort of snuck up on us, right? Because this had been scraped for many years. We can see the sediment loss as the grasses have come in. Fantastic, right? And you can see the wet period, the precipitation on here. If you go on Google Earth, you will see this. You will see this, actually. You can always find white sands, right? And you can come to the west, you can find the Jornada, and you can find the scrape site. And you can see the area that has been affected. The sands have blown in, and you can see the grasses on there. Okay, so this was actually an opportunity for us now. We can actually sort of look at the mechanisms, try to figure out what actually happened here. Okay, what we've also done, that's without shrubs, we're actually been actively trying to put grasses back in the system. The Jornada has been doing this for 100 years, right? Unsuccessfully. We are now doing it successfully with what we call ConMods. So we're going into areas like this that do not have grasses, right? We have shrubs, and they're bare, large bare patches between the shrubs. And we've been putting what we call connectivity modifiers. They're hardware cloth, you know what that is? We just cross it like this, and we reduce the wind movement of sediment, right? Which is what happens here, right? We've got the reduced of the sediment flux, and we get grasses coming back into the system. So we put these little connectivity modifiers in between the shrubs, right? So we reduce the movement of the sediment flux, and actually we actually capture litter, we capture grass seeds, and we actually increase the availability of water, and we get grasses growing in those little connectivity modifiers. Okay, so we're actually getting grass recovery into these systems. It's fantastic. So that's this data here, and it actually depends upon where you're at. So the top one is an aeolian site. That's where you're at here. That's a sand sheet. Okay, it happens through, takes a while, but you actually get it to recover. The second one is an alluvial active. That's the Donanas. Okay, that's a creosote site where there's actually movement by water. Okay, it's an active site, alluvial, and that's actually that works too. Up on this side of the Bajada, it's a very stable site, not movement of material. It doesn't work so well. Okay, so it depends upon where you're at in the basin. Okay, so we're actually restoring grasses at the Jornada.
I am Bob Schooley from the University of Illinois and also a co-PI at the Jornada. And my topic is going to be on wildlife and wildlife responses to shrub encroachment and to attempts to restore desert grasslands. And I want to start off with, I think, a perception that a lot of folks have that whether it's correct or not kind of depends on spatial scale, and that is that shrublands are kind of bad for wildlife and bad for biodiversity. But if you actually look at a local site scale, compare shrubland to the grassland in Chihuahuan Desert and lots of other deserts too, you actually see similar or higher species diversity in shrublands, similar to higher species abundances in shrublands. So it's not like they're a species to pauperate kind of thing. This is true if we look at small mammals here at the Jornada, and I have a fairly similar total rodent biomass, desert rodents, in shrublands and grasslands across 11 years. It's true if you look at songbirds, it's true if you look at lizard communities, it's true if you look at ants. So it's not a bad thing kind of at the local scale. The problem is that the shrub encroachment is so extensive at a regional scale that there's just not much grassland left, and what's left has been fragmented. And so grassland wildlife species have been declining regionally, and so there's some good data from the Breeding Bird Survey showing declines over 25 years for species like horned larks and cassin sparrows, which are grassland species. Or species that require a mix of grasslands and shrublands, like scaled quail, have been declining pretty drastically in the Chihuahuan Desert region. So because of concerns for wildlife and for loss of forage productivity, shrubs and try to get reduce competition and get grass recovery. And this work started back in the 1980s, kind of smaller scale, and then starting in around 2006, 2007, it got really ramped up. The program was kind of formalized as Restore New Mexico, and if you look, I've got a figure on the handout. There are some years where the BLM Las Cruces District Office was treating 35 to 40,000 hectares per year for brush removal. So this is a massive kind of management intervention. Typical treatment sizes could be 1,000 hectares or larger. This is probably a half hectare out here to give you some sense. And so we developed a good partnership. It was started by Brandon Besselmeyer, and then I've kind of added on looking at the wildlife stuff with some external grants. And we've got a good working relationship. Phil Smith is hiding in the way back here. He was one of our key collaborators with the BLM on Restore New Mexico. The goal was to try to get some good understanding of how plants and animals respond so we could target future applications and maybe get a little bigger bang for the buck. And so what happens? I forgot to say this last time, unlike here, which is all sandy soils and mesquite, we're working on sort of gravelly loam soils and creosote bush. So all the wildlife responses I'm talking about are in terms of creosote bush system and treatments for creosote bush. Does a pretty good job of killing the shrubs. Often 75 to 80% may be killed. But there are still some shrubs left, more than you get in a remnant grassland. We see a significant increase in grass recovery. But as Brandon showed this morning, it can be highly variable and depending on certain things. Elevation seems to matter. So we get higher grass recovery at higher elevations. I think it was above 5,000 feet we showed this morning. And we have some other data showing that initial conditions matter. So the amount of grass herbaceous cover before it's treated is a good predictor of what you're going to get 5 years later, independent of everything else. So combined, and also it's not typically black grama dominated that we get back. Okay, so it's not what you would sort of ideally have from remnant grasslands. You tend to get a flush of bush muley on the early treatment sites. That's typical. And old treatments might be dominated by fluff grass, most likely. Okay. So kind of taken all together, where you still have some shrubs left, you're getting grass recovery, but not as much as remnant grasslands, as it's not black grama. We're kind of inferring that it's kind of creating a novel ecosystem, basically a savanna state that's intermediate in habitat structure between remnant grasslands and untreated shrublands. And so the question is, what does that do for wildlife species, especially grassland species, a conservation concern? And we've looked at a bunch of different groups, and for the most part, most species and groups have responded positively. And so we get higher abundances or higher use of treated sites than untreated sites. This is true for some of the grassland species I mentioned that were declining. I work on a species of small mammal called the desert-tailed, or the banner-tailed kangaroo rat. We consider it a keystone species because it facilitates recovery of other species. It has a pretty strong response to treatments. But not all species respond positively, and not all groups. For instance, some of the bird species are still associated with remnant grasslands. And so our main conclusion is that these treated sites have a lot of conservation value, but they don't replace remnant grasslands in terms of wildlife. And I guess the other big lesson we learned is you have to be patient. So some of our responses, positive responses, took 15 to 20 years after treatment to really express themselves. And so some of the young treatments where we didn't see any kind of effect, then you wait till a decade or more and you start seeing this effect. So assessing the outcomes of grassland restoration, at least in terms of wildlife, requires long-term monitoring before you should make any conclusions. Okay, and then the final thing, what we're working on now is really going up to even a bigger spatial scale. So we're working on these landscape mosaic blocks, we call them, because the management out there is now is creating this mosaic of stuff. We got untreated shrublands, we got shrublands that were treated back in the 1980s, we got shrublands that were treated 5 years ago, we got remnant grasslands. And so is there some kind of ideal mix out there that might be a good balance for wildlife in general in terms of grassland favoring species and shrubland favoring species? And can we get at that? And we're doing that by having these large areas. They're 7 kilometer by 7 kilometer that have a mix of these habitats. They represent a gradient of treatments from about 5 to 7% up to 85% treatment. And then we have really long transects in there, 3 kilometer transects, 4 in each block. We're measuring songbird communities, lizard communities, and banner-tailed kangaroo rats, and trying to understand how treatments at the block scale, the transect scale, and within the transect scale are affecting their responses. And I think the mosaics are especially probably relevant to some of the wide-ranging species that we know are constrained to some of the larger species and carnivores too, and that are constrained to one habitat. So they're using the mosaic, and there may be some kind of mosaic that is ideal.